the Young Dudes by MsKingBean89, Chapter 129, 7th Year, Instinct. You told him! Remus kissed Sirius as soon as they were alone. Well, you worked it out, Sirius said, laughing, as he was being pushed backwards into their bedroom. Billy and James had had to a prefect's meeting, and Peter was still in detention. Remus had dragged Sirius upstairs as fast as he could, all aches and pains forgotten. But you told him, Remus insisted, running his tongue up Sirius's neck, collarbone's earlobe. Sirius shuddered, and the backs of his knees hit the bed frame. Remus gave him a shove that was half urgent, half playful, and they fell back together. Merlin, Sirius gasped, as Remus continued his assault, climbing on top of him, a knee either side of Sirius's hips. If I'd known this was how you'd respond, I'd have told Prongs ages ago. Shut up, Remus kissed him hard on the lips, hands on Sirius's belt. Sirius obeyed. Remus was a bit surprised too. Who'd have thought that confession was such a turn-on? If he wasn't careful, he'd be telling everyone he met. So, he said, half an hour later, sitting by the window in his boxers, lighting a cigarette. Sirius lay on the bed, still, vaguely stunned and staring at him. It went well? Sirius blinked, very slowly, as if his eyelids were heavy. Remus grinned, exhaling smoke, trying to aim it through the crack in the window. James, what did he say? I think the first thing was, what the fuck are you playing at? But it got better from there, Sirius snorted. Did he ask lots of questions? Sort of. Nothing I didn't expect, I suppose. What about Evans? She said, oh my god, about 100 times, but she came around fairly quickly. Prongs too. Except the Pratt won't tell Wormtail for us. Says we have to do it. Well, fair enough. Remus sucked on his cigarette again, then blew smoke into the room, watching it fill the space between them. What questions did he ask? Sirius closed his eyes, breathing in. Nothing scandalous. How long for? When did it start? Why I didn't tell him? That sort of thing. What did you say? I told the truth. Roll us a fag. Remus already had. He held it out. Sirius rolled onto his stomach and reached his long pale arm through the smoke to take it, placed it between his pursed lips, and snapped his fingers. He sucked, then rolled back, exhaling with a sigh. How'd you feel? Remus asked, unable to tear his eyes away. It still seemed miraculous beyond belief. Sirius Black, naked, in my bloody bed. Right now? Bloomin' marvellous, Sirius winked wickedly. About Prongs? Okay, good I think, he stretched, and disappearing under one of the pillows. What's this? Oh, Remus blushed, jumping from the window. I got some letters back. Ferrex is okay. And, Grant, Sirius's lip curled, as he picked up the postcard Grant had sent from Brighton. It had a colour photo of the pier on the front. The sky looked blue and the sun was shining. Remus was so glad he had sent it. It was nice to picture Grant in a bright, cheerful place like that. Sirius continued smoking as he read it. He's seeing someone with a nice body, but he misses you. Remus jumped onto the bed and snatched the card away, raising it aloft so Sirius couldn't reach. He's seeing someone with a nice body, and he misses me. Separate statements. Well, Sirius folded his arms, lying back again, stiff puffing. I hope you're writing to him about my gorgeous body. Of course, Remus laughed, lying back down beside him. They stared up at the red velvet bed curtains together. You're not really jealous, are you? Remus asked, tentatively. Pfft, no, Sirius nudged him gently with his elbow. Curious, maybe. About? What do you think? You and him? You've never told me any detail. We were 15. There was no detail. Just snogging, Remus tutted. Honestly, what a thing to ask. James did. About us. He never. Well, he didn't. But I knew he wanted to. No, he didn't. You're just being vain. Remus leaned over to stub out a cigarette in the cold cup of tea on his nightstand. Sirius caught him at the hip and pulled him over. Remus closed his eyes and let himself be pulled. Thank God your guy had the map. I would have gone to the library. Merlin's balls! The door flew open, and Peter stood gaping in the doorway, clapping his hands to his eyes. Remus leapt up from the bed, as if Sirius was on fire, and began scrabbling about for his trousers on the floor, shouting, Sorry, Pete! Sorry, Pete! Shit, shit, shit! What the fuck? Peter shouted back, still covering his eyes. Sirius yanked the duvet up, staring at them both, then burst out laughing. Wormy, we've got something to tell you. Friday, 20th January 1978. Peter took a little while to get used to it, but then they all did, really. Even Remus and Sirius. They kept forgetting that the Marauders knew, and they'd grown so used to consciously avoiding each other that they were utterly shy to show any sort of affection in front of the others. Of course, Remus kept reminding himself, it was better to keep a low profile anyway. They still had the rest of the skill to worry about. You could tell Christopher, though, Sirius said, as they left the library for the last time before the Hogsmeade trip. It was almost midnight, and they'd had to be chased out by Madam Pince, who wouldn't let them stay any longer, even when Lily and James had flashed their head girl and boy badges. Oh, now you remember his name, Remus yawned, clutching his books to his chest, really just for something to hold on to. I'm just saying, Sirius caught the yawn and covered his mouth, but continued speaking. He already knows half of it. No harm in telling him the rest. Not really fair to let him keep pining away for you when there's not a chance in... Sirius Black, are you jealous? Lily cackled, giggly with overtiredness. No, Sirius sniffed, nose in the air. I just don't want any misunderstandings. Well, if I survive tomorrow, then I'll think about it, Remus yawned again. That made everyone go quiet, and he regretted saying it. They walked back to the common room in solemn silence. Gryffindor Tower was peaceful and mostly empty. A few stray second years up past their curfew fled to the dorms as soon as they saw James and Lily, and the Marauders took their usual seats by the fireplace. Remus settled into his armchair and immediately returned to the book he had been reading before Pince had so rudely interrupted. Sirius flicked his wand that kept hanging over the fireplace, and Lily summoned some clean teacups from the cupboard, but still no one spoke until the water was boiled and the tea was brewing in its pot. Moony, Sirius said, softly, put down the book, eh? We've done so much already. Doesn't feel like enough, Remus replied, feeling prickly and irritable. I know I'm missing something. Everyone kept staring at him, and by now he didn't know whether it was because they were amazed or repulsed about the whole Sirius thing, or whether they were convinced he was about to run away and join the werewolves. It's loads, James said, now pouring the tea and handing Remus a saucer. Honestly, you know enough now to walk any defence against the dark arts exam. Might as well bunk off the rest of the year. This isn't an exam, Remus snapped. The cup and saucer shook in his hands, so he set it down on the arm of the chair. He had a feeling Sirius had noticed that, but hopefully no one else. But Moony, Peter slurped his own tea noisily. You've done this before. Last year. Exactly, James nodded, encouragingly. Remus sighed and said no more. What was the point? Whining wasn't going to get him anywhere. He sipped his tea, winning his hand to stay steady. This was potentially the worst time of the month for a mission, he couldn't help thinking. Only 4 nights away from the full moon, and his magic felt stronger than usual, but also less predictable. He was restless, his skin crawling, his senses bare, and his mood up. He knew he was forgetting something. He just knew. A dark feeling of foreboding that told him all the curses in the world would be no good. He stood up, sharply, knocking the teacup off the armchair. Sirius was quick, and stopped at mid-air with the flick of his wand. Remus ignored this. Going to bed, he said, cracking his knuckles. Okay, Moony, James nodded, brightly. He glanced at Lily. Think we'll stay down here for a bit. Peter looked at Sirius, and then Remus, with an expression of faint terror. Remus tutted. It's okay, Wormtail. I really am just going to sleep. See you all tomorrow. He didn't sleep. His brain wouldn't let him. He hated Dumbledore, and he hated Greyback. He hated the war, and as the hours got smaller and smaller, he hated Peter too. He did not hate the other werewolf, though, the one who was not Greyback, just as he had not hated Olivia, though she frightened him. The more Remus thought about what was ahead of him, the less he was sure about his preparedness. Yes, he knew more curses and X's now than Regulus and Severus combined, probably. But the more he thought about his encounter with Livia, the less useful these things seemed. Hadn't she said it herself? You can wear that uniform and wave your silly stick, but you know that you have more in common with me than anyone in that castle. He knew she was stronger than him. She could hurt him if she wanted to. But she hadn't. Not really. Instead, he remembered the pity he had felt immediately after the meeting. He remembered the desire to help her in his conversations with both Ferrex and Dumbledore. As dawn broke, Remus lay wide awake, thinking at 1,000,000 miles an hour, his heart hammering and his stomach fizzing with excited anticipation. If he had to go to war, then fine. But this was his battle, and it would be on his terms.
It was an April morning when they told us we should go. And as I turned to you, you smiled at me. How could we say no? Oh, the fun to have, to live the dreams we always had. Oh, the songs to sing when we at last turn again. Sweating your glancing kids to those who claim they know. Know the streets that seem and his, the devil's in his hole.
Saturday, 21st January 1978. Breakfast that morning was a bleak affair. Remus was ravenously hungry, but no one else seemed to be eating. Sirius was on black coffee, and it was already making him jittery. He kept bobbing up and down in his seat. Mary and Marlene were the only ones acting halfway normal, because neither of them knew about the assignment. 3 broomsticks later? Mary asked, brightly. Lily and James nodded, trying to smile, and succeeding in only looking slightly deranged. They were holding hands under the table, again, and Remus was trying not to think about it, instead reaching for the plate of bacon for another helping. Can I bring Yaz? Marlene was asking Mary. Mary raised an eyebrow. I suppose. Great, Marlene grinned. Mary's mouth twisted, but she didn't say anything. The walk into Hogsmeade seemed longer than ever. Fortunately, Lily and James had duties to perform, so at least they weren't following Remus about, just waiting. Unfortunately, Sirius had enough nervous energy for 3 people, and Remus could feel it coming off him in waves. Where shall we go? He murmured, low enough so only Peter and Remus could hear. Everywhere, I suppose. Would it help if I was Padfoot? If you like. Shall I change too? Peter asked. If you like. Remus was unable to summon up very much interest. He was too busy trying to work out whether or not Hogsmeade smelled genuinely different, or whether it was because he usually tried to ignore scents as a human. They ducked into his shop alleyway, and Peter and Sirius transformed behind some bins. Wormtail crawled onto Remus's palm, and he sat him on his shoulder. The weight was a small comfort, even if his whiskers tickled Remus's neck. Nice to have Padfoot too, big and black and excitable, trotting alongside like a loyal companion. Yes, much better when your friends aren't human, in Remus's opinion. At least, right now. They walked. Remus deliberately avoided the high street, instead wandering around the backs of houses. How many people lived in Hogsmeade? How many were potentially in danger, without even knowing it? He tried sniffing the air, and it was like exercising a muscle he had allowed to a trophy. Some scents came through stronger than others. Padfoot, obviously, and Wormtail. Household waste from the bins, compost from the back gardens, and magic. That heavy iron taste which settled on his tongue like treacle when he was this close to the moon. Other students, the sickly sweet aroma of honeydukes, and the comforting smell of parchment emanating from scribbing shafts. The forest. He could smell the forest if he really tried. He closed his eyes briefly and inhaled. Green, lush, dense, teeming with life. And magic. At first it seemed like an indulgent whim, just an idea that he rather liked the smell and wanted to get closer. But the further they walked, and the closer they got, the more important it felt. Remus had the impression that something had been drawing him in this direction for some time now. The forbidden forest loomed over the little village, miles and miles of darkness and danger, against a backdrop of blue-grey snow-capped mountains. For the first time, as a human anyway, Remus had the urge to go in, to explore. Padfoot whined beside him as they left Hogsmeade in the road behind them. He wondered if Sirius could smell it too, but it was impossible to get any kind of sense out of him in dog form. Remus tried to switch off his rational mind for a moment. Was there anything there at all, or was he just overthinking? The magic in the forest wasn't the same as at Hogwarts. It wasn't human. It didn't have that metallic gunpowder smell Remus had come to associate with most witches and wizards he knew. It was more organic, less precise, a heady, mulchy smell of soil and decay. There was power in there. He knew this instinctively. Dizzying, huge, earth-moving power. It would have been frightening once, but the closer Remus grew, the surer he was. The power was his, if he wanted it. All he needed to do was let it in. Another scent revealed itself. An animal. Blood. Remus felt the wolf inside stir, and his desire to enter the forest grew almost impossible to resist. Padfoot barked, sharply, and ran in front of him. The great black dog turned on Remus, raising its hackles and emitting a low growl. Remus blinked, snapping back into himself. Wormtail was speaking and quivering on his shoulder. Maybe he had been for a few minutes now. Sirius, Remus frowned. Move. Wormtail gave another squeak before scuttling down Remus's robes into his left pocket. Remus felt hot and angry, as if something had been snatched from him that he wanted, that he needed. He made to move forward, and Sirius transformed back into himself. Where are you going? He said, still blocking Remus's way. Can't you smell it? Remus stopped trying to get past and caught Sirius's eye. Can you? He whispered, not quite believing it. There's something bad in there. It must be the wolf. It is, Remus nodded, eagerly. Surely that was obvious. I can't be sure though, Sirius frowned. I can, Remus replied. Let me past. Sirius moved again, blocking him. No, he said. You've done what you said you'd do. We know it's there. Let's go back now. Remus stared over Sirius's shoulder, into the dark, wintry winds beyond. He wanted this so badly, more than he'd ever wanted anything. Except, maybe, the boy standing before him. I have to, he finished. It was an insufficient explanation, but it was all he had. There you lot are! Where's Pete? Sirius and Remus's deadlock was interrupted by James's cheerful shout. They both turned to see him striding towards them from the village, Lily at his side. What are you doing all the way out here? Thought you were supposed to be trailing your scent all over town or something. Yeah, we're just coming back now, Sirius said, which Remus thought was pretty cheeky, not to mention presumptuous. You lot can, Remus said. I'm not. Not what? Lily asked. Where is Peter? Remus could feel the warm weight of Wormtail's furry little body in his pocket, but said nothing. James had been agonising for months over when to break the animagus thing to his girlfriend, and now was definitely not the right time. I'm not coming back with you. I have to go in there, he pointed at the forest, aware of how mad he sounded. You what? James looked concerned. His eyes flicked to Sirius automatically, which only annoyed Remus even more. Sirius wasn't his keeper, for God's sake. The wolf's in there, Sirius explained, and Mooney's gone completely mental and decided he has to go in and face it right now. Remus's head snapped back to Sirius, outraged and betrayed. I have not gone mental, you prick, he said, fiercely. How could he explain that this was just what had to happen? That he knew it, deep in his marrow, at his very core. You lot go back, or wait here. You won't understand. Help us understand, Remus, Lily came forward, gently. This isn't like you, barreling into a fight. Remus nearly laughed in her face. Did no one remember who he was? What he was? I'm not going to fight anyone, he said. I just want to talk to them. That's what I'm supposed to do. They were all staring at him, unconvinced. His anger flared again, and he had a very unpleasant thought that he could very easily get past them if he wanted to. The magic in the forest was more than enough. It made him feel strong. He could force his friends to stay in place, and it wouldn't even tire him out. He probably wouldn't even need his wand. This notion burned so brightly it frightened him. He looked at Lily again, refusing to look at Sirius or James. We were wrong. This isn't a battle, and I'm not a weapon against the werewolves, he tried to explain. I'm a way in. They need to know I don't mean any harm. But Remus, if they're on you-know-whose side, they're not, he snapped. Not all of them. Lily looked uncertain, and Sirius was practically burning a hole in the back of Remus's head with his indignance. Remus ran his hands through his hair. They weren't going to understand. How could they? He barely did. Look, he said, this is important, and I need you all to trust me. It wasn't a request, and nor was it a received one. James and Lily looked at each other, then at Sirius. James nodded. Okay, Mooney. Sirius made a noise of protest, but Remus was too far gone now to care. He would make it up to him later, when he could think clearly, when every instinct in him wasn't telling him to run into the forest at full pelt. Okay, he nodded back. Stay here. A tug in his midriff as the magic took over. He would never be sure whether or not he'd done it on purpose, and at the time, he simply did not care. He turned and began to walk into the forest, quickly, his long legs making long strides, his friends behind him, unmoving, unable to follow.